As you well know, Uganda is currently grappling with corruption, grand corruption. The money that would be going into service delivery is ending up in people's pockets. I strongly believe that if we dealt with corruption now, we would see a change, because then at the end of the day, citizens will be encouraged, will be motivated to actually pay their taxes, because then they'll know that, okay, their tax is going into development, into service delivery. So as long as I know my tax is going to the right things, I'll gladly pay as much tax as is required of me.
Do you aspire for a booming middle-class economy? Listen along to understand what turns the wheels of Uganda's economy with our line of incredible influencers in their fields.
Welcome yet to another episode of your favorite podcast on Uganda. Today we are very honored to interview Miss Ruth Namara. Did you know you're my namesake? Namara is just not my government name, but yes, it is my name. We are so honored to have you, Ruth Namara. She is the communications lead at Unbounded Associates. She has been at the forefront of advocacy for children's education rights. Now, this is something different and very profound because we haven't had anyone like this before. She has had profound impact on governance in Africa and collaborations with globally recognized organizations. She's truly making a difference. Ruth, welcome to the podcast on Uganda.
Thank you so much. I'm Ruth Namara. I'm based in Kampala, Uganda, but I'm a global citizen. Glad to be here and can't wait to get into this conversation.
You have such an impressive track record, especially in advocating for children's education. Now, how did you get into communications and advocacy?
Well, I started actively doing communications work in teen. That was my entry point into the nonprofit sector right after university.
Wow.
But right before that, I must say that communication is a talent. It's something that I never studied, but somehow I found myself taking that direction, because while I was in school as a debater, I am a poet. So somehow I found myself getting into spaces where I have to speak, where I have to do advocacy, and somehow that led me to that direction. So in 20, my first job was around policy and advocacy. That's how I get into communication.
Right after university, you got into this and you haven't left. You've been at it for close to 8 years now.
Yeah, it's now coming to 10 years.
If you were to give us a rundown of how different are people advocating for children's rights or just advocating for children's education?
Well, gone are the days when we used to speak for the children.
Yeah.
And at a time when children were probably in a position where they were not able to speak for themselves, probably something that wasn't regarded as important or something that we really need to talk about. But as we got along over the years, it became evident children's voices need to be brought at the forefront.
Right.
And therefore, we needed crusaders to begin to bring these voices to the limelight, to start talking about children, because we know children's rights matter. As we did this work, we realized that children need to get involved. Oftentimes, we have always thought that we probably know what the children need, what the children want, but then we've seen children grow to learn to speak for themselves, especially where they've been given an environment that they can express themselves, can talk about things that affect them. But definitely, this has largely got to do with the relationships that we grow with the children around us, that they are able to freely talk to their caretakers, to their parents, talk about the things that children talk about. Yeah, but also an environment where the parents and caretakers get to understand the language of the children. Yes, This language does not necessarily mean the words, but being able to notice a child's behavior and kind of establish particular patterns within these children's lives to know that, okay, something must be wrong. So we've had quite a number of actors, right, from a global level, regional level, national level, local level, that have come up, have invested resources, have created platforms to come and talk about children's issues, and even provide them with space to talk about, their own issues and advocate for their rights. Currently, the trend is that we are getting children to speak for themselves. We are providing them with platforms to talk about issues that affect them in their own language, in their own way, and in their own spaces.
Right. And it goes without today that children actually have the platforms readily available and they're very eloquent. They know what they want and they know how they want to be treated. So I definitely think there's a power in communicating and also that communication shaping policy and perception. I commend you for having gotten right into it and not leaving children's rights and education. You talked about the environment that breeds or favors these children to be outspoken and speak for themselves. I really want to hear about partnerships you've worked with. You already mentioned a few organizations, but what strategies have these organizations used where you have worked to be able to create that conducive environment?
Sure. It goes without saying that with this kind of work, you cannot work in silos. With advocacy, it comes with numbers. That if you're going to advance a particular cause, you need as many people and as many actors as possible on board. Because then once you come on board and you're speaking with one voice and these voices are coming from a different direction, then you build a certain kind of momentum, you build a certain kind of demand, and therefore you know that it will draw the attention that it deserves from the supply side, from the duty bearers, or from whoever you're demanding or asking the right questions. So this is where partnerships and collaborations come in handy, because you know that at the end of the day, you need support. You may not have it all. One, you may have the money, but you may not have the right skill set to actually advance some of these causes. You may have the skill set, but you may not have the money, or you may not have the time, or you may not have the infrastructure, or you may not have access to the spaces, or you may not actually have access to the people whom you're advocating for, or you may not have the information. So in an environment, in an ecosystem like that, you need as many people as possible. And these different actors come in to make a contribution. So,
practical terms, if someone is not understanding what we're talking about, children's rights and education, how do you deploy strategies to advocate?
Interesting. The first step for us, you identify a need in a particular community or environment or society, because it is that need, it is that problem, it is that challenge that informs how you're going to deal with it, with whom you're going to work with, when, where, and what. After identifying,
for example?
Yes. For example, if it's about health and children's education, that probably our children are not feeding well. And because they are not feeding well, they are not able to learn. After identifying that problem, then you know, okay, who is involved? Who does it affect? Who is interested in such a challenge? And who is in position to address this challenge? For example, then you begin to map out different actors or people that you know are responsible for talking about this issue, for understanding it, and then you're able to draw them to know, okay, at what point does a particular group come in? At what point does a particular actor come in? At what point do we begin engaging? Do we talking about this issue? Because then after identifying the different actors on board, then you get to speak to these people. Do they understand the problem at hand? Do they actually even recognize that it is a problem? Because then if you're going to advocate or to do something about this problem, you all have to have a common understanding. Much as we are coming from different perspectives, from different directions, we all must be on the same page. At the end of the day, we identify the roles of each of the different actors. So what that means is that the collaboration comes in. That if you identify the different roles, then we know actor A is going to do this, actor B is going to bring in the money, actor C is going to generate the key messages, actor D is actually going to reach out to a particular actor, say maybe government that is in charge of responding to this problem. We need this kind of expertise on board to ensure that we have a better understanding of this, or we have a particular actor that is actually going to do more research, therefore we get more evidence and more information about the problem, or you reach out to another actor that actually has the spaces and has access to these people that are actually affected, the children, that has been working with these children and probably knows how to interact with these children and get them on board, get them to share their testimonials and experiences about how they are affected, how they're not feeding well, how they are hungry while they're in the classroom. And then you're able to build momentum on that.
Wait a minute. Do you know what it will take for Uganda to achieve a middle-class economy by 2040? Please send us an email at onuganda@gmail.com. That's great. I was just thinking about how not so different this is with marketing, even though this is advocacy. The strategies are clear. You're still riding on what the initial intentions of your campaign or activity were. I'm just curious about campaigns. What would we call them in advocacy? Is this still a campaign?
Yes, it's a.
What are those memorable campaigns in children rights and education that you've worked on, or that other organizations have worked on and you've really admired and they resonated with you?
One of them was last year, a campaign on transforming education that led to the Transforming Education Summit that really involved stakeholders at different levels, but I largely got involved in this campaign at the global level, where we were advocating for children's rights as far as education is concerned. And our key message was that everybody should care about investing in education for every child, regardless of where they are, their age, their economic status, race, and color. We needed to invest in education because, like we know it and like we've known it, is that education is the cornerstone, education is the pillar of our generations. That without education, these children, probably their future is compromised, and definitely we must do something about it. So this brought together so many actors at different levels. We got to see children speaking about the value of education and why they need to be educated. And we saw voices of children from countries that have been affected by war and how they are no longer in school and what that means. We saw parents coming out to bring out their voices on why it is important that their children are accorded an environment where they are able to learn. We saw voices from national governments calling on different donors, international donors, requesting for investments in their governments to be able to provide quality education for their children. We saw donors reaching out to private sector actors, demanding that they need to make investment in education. It was quite amazing how different actors, again through research, had calculated the return on investment on education. It was quite amazing.
What was the return on investment that they calculated?
It wasn't calculated in numbers, but it largely indicated that when you invest in education, when you invest in the young generation, these are the people that are going to grow up and will ultimately give back and contribute any country's economy. Yeah, because then they'll get these jobs, they'll pay taxes, and these taxes will get back into the economy and they will contribute to the development of their different countries. And actually, the return on investment in education is 3 times, yeah, 3 times more. What this means is that there are quite enormous benefits when we invest in the education of our children, because when they grow, they come and give back through their skills, their expertise. They're able to contribute to sustainable development.
Right. I can imagine storytelling is a big part of what you do, especially if you have to speak on behalf of the children. I'm curious about your content creation process. How do you tell these stories on behalf of the children?
Well, when we are telling stories on behalf of the children, there are safeguarding issues that come in.
Right.
But, for example, depending on the kind of story that you're telling, this would involve visuals. One, we have what we call consent. Is that, do you have the consent to actually share pictures of these children, to share voices of these children? Do you have consent from their parents or caretaker? Even when you're telling this story, it is quite important that is at the back of your mind, because if you're telling stories in health, there are so many safeguarding issues that come and play, because what you don't want to reveal the identity of the child, or you don't want to reveal the identity of the parents or caretaker, and you don't want to reveal certain details that will definitely reveal the identity of the child. As a storyteller, how I take a photo of a child is really very important. How I take a photo of the parent, because even when the face of the child is not revealed, but definitely people around will connect the parent or the caretaker to the child. So one will ensure that we are protecting the identity of these children. And then the other bit is that we use anonymity as much as possible to ensure that we are not revealing the names or the locations of these children for protection issues. In that sense, you're talking about this child's story in a way that is not demeaning, but drawing empathy from other people that are going to read this story, that are going to listen to this story, such that they can be triggered to do something about it. Yeah.
And now that you speak of empathy, is there a line between empathy and self-pity? Because oftentimes we have NGOs and organizations that are seeking for sponsorship or funding, and they put themselves in such a place. Do you get my point? Most times they put pictures of children with flies on their faces. If it doesn't have flies, then it's not worth the money. In you being in that space, what other conversations around that, since you also highlighted the issue around safeguarding and consent?
Yeah, actually, the trend and the practice has changed. That even with international donors and other humanitarian actors, are beginning to appreciate that we need to do this differently. We need to present and portray these images differently in a way that is not demeaning. So the best practice has been that we are no longer required to portray children as sad, but rather as smart, smiling, happy children. And the best practice now is that rather than portraying self-pity, instead we build a case on why it is important that people support a particular. And that is where research comes, because currently we're into evidence-based advocacy. That is why we have to have the facts. If, say, you're looking for children's sponsorship, especially in education, it is quite clear that, yes, education is important. But for you to convince someone to support a child's education, you must show them why it is important that this child is educated. And it's important that they support them, because ultimately you paint a picture of what this child is going to become and how much more this child is going to give back to society, how much it is of significance for this child to be educated, that anyone that is interested will be compelled to do something about it, as opposed to self-pity, because so much is happening around the world that, I mean, it's right about time that we have to do something about it. There are people out there that are in worse situations, or that the people that you're actually reaching out for support are probably in worse situations, but they should be compelled to do something about it because there is something better that is going to come out of their support.
Yeah. Maybe also for more practical, to better understand this concept, what are some of the most violated children rights in Uganda?
I can't really point out a particular one, but in my opinion, I want to say the right to health, because with education, currently the government of Uganda has done so much, has established programs to ensure that every child is able to go to school and learn. However, our children's health is yet to be realized. So many children out there are not receiving the right health services that they require.
From their parents or from the government?
I don't want to say government per se, but I could put it in the way that our healthcare is yet to get there. That I should walk into a local health center and get the medical services that I need. Because healthcare is very expensive in Uganda, and not so many parents can afford health insurance. While our children are growing, again, depending on the environment, are compromised, right from what they eat, even the people that they are exposed to. They need quality health care. And for children to be able to grow, learn, they need to be healthy. And when we talk about health, so much is involved in that. We need more advocacy and more interventions around.
It's wonderful that you actually highlight health. And earlier you spoke about education being the cornerstone of development. I can imagine with your extensive experience, you've had challenges you've faced in your line of work. What challenges could those be apart from health? Or call them opportunities? Some people like to call them opportunities.
Currently, I'll use the Ugandan context, that there has been some progress as far as early childhood development is concerned. We recently saw government step up in terms of establishing and putting in place policies that are inclusive and are conducive for early childhood development to thrive. Recently, civil society actors, in collaboration with the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, particularly Alias County, Uganda, conducted the first ever national situation analysis of early childhood development in Uganda.
That's nice. Sorry, Ruth, I'd love to get my hands on that before I forget.
Yes, it's a report. I'll share a link to this report.
Thank you very much.
The biggest question that we are asking are our children developmentally on track? And childhood development involves quite a big spectrum of things. It has things to do with nurturing care. It has things to do with health, with education, and everything that is involved as far as a child growth is concerned. And we have made significant progress on quite a number of to do with children. We are yet to see improvement in certain areas. For example, the question of childcare. I'll give you an example of working mother. That is our environment conducive enough for mother to actually be able to work while their children are being taken care of, and they don't have to worry about their babies, on whether they are safe, they have eaten, they're doing well. And we are saying childcare should be a policy issue, something that is invested in by government. For example, in various jurisdictions, are we able to provide childcare centers, say in our local markets, You see those market women, they have children. For them to be able to conduct their business, there should be childcare centers where they can keep their babies as they run about their daily errands. Different workplaces, corporate workplaces, do you provide space for childcare that as a working mom, take off time maybe during lunch break to go and take care of my child, do breastfeeding, but ensure that my child is safe somewhere, they're resting, and I can always check on them as and when I'm working. There's quite a lot that as stakeholders, we need to have candid conversations to ensure that indeed our children are growing healthy and they are meeting their developmental milestones, because our young children are the future generations, and countries, nations thrive on their people.
I think you're right. Stakeholder involvement needs to be really more proactive, because I feel like with a cultural context, especially across Africa, all these initiatives or policy inventions can be very foreign. I now really wonder, if I brought you back 5 years down the line, how different would those trends have shaped the future of advocacy in education?
Looking ahead is that there's quite great promise that things are going to get better. While we appreciate that we live in a world of restraints, everyone on board, every actor acknowledges that this is important and we must do something around it. So really the conversation is, what more can we do even with these limited resources? And how can we work together to ensure that we are acquiring more resources, creating all that we need to ensure that this happens for our children? Because government is on board, different governments are on board, civil society is on board, parents are on board, caregivers, children are up and speaking up for themselves. International actors are saying, no, we must talk about this, and they're creating spaces for people to come and talk about these conversations that are shaping the global agenda as far as children are concerned. We strongly believe that in 5 years to come, things are going to get better in terms of how governments allocate resources, but development and well-being of children. We're going to see improvements in how parents actually get involved with their children in terms of nurturing them and ensuring that they are creating conducive environments for their children to grow. We're beginning to see as many actors and donors make commitments, make pledges to invest more in the world's children.
Let's go back to that point of parents. My sister is a parent, and she says she has 2 boys at the moment. And she said when she has her 3rd child, she'll take time off and nurture this child. And I'm thinking, there's nannies and all these people to help about. She looks like the career woman. But she said that, and I was kind of surprised. But I think it resonates with what you're just saying now, that parents want to get more involved, opposed to how our parents did it, took us to boarding school. Not that we're complaining, mommy, but we're just saying that parents are going to be more involved now. But where do you think the digital transformation is playing a role? Because since the pandemic, it really accelerated the adoption of digital tools in education. I remember there was a lot of courses or modules given to children, and this trend, I think, will continue to influence advocacy. Now, how are you using digital platforms to reach and engage more people?
As far as digital technologies are concerned, is that we're not going back. Instead, we're seeing more new developments. We're seeing new technologies emerge and evolve, and therefore that requires that everyone is on board and there's a certain level of adaptability in terms of how we incorporate digital technologies in everything that we do. While it has its advantages, it also has its disadvantages. This came in at a time when the world was faced with a pandemic and everyone was really trying to figure out what to do and how to do things differently. But in terms of understanding these digital technologies work and how they affect our well-being. It's something that everyone is yet to get on board. In the context of children, there's so much information out there on this digital platform. As parents, there's need to appreciate that while these digital technologies and platforms are here to support us, is our work and step in where we are not, there's need for some bit of regulation, creating time of our busy schedules to understand and know, okay, what is it that our children are accessing online? There's great need for us to protect our children online in terms of what information they are accessing, who they are talking to, and ensuring that we are exposing them to the right things. Being able to know at what point do you start letting your child engage with these digital platforms, technologies, because depending on the age of the child, if the child is under 5 or under 2, then it's not about time that they are exposed to these digital technologies like phones, tabs, iPads. Sometimes we are under the impression that we'll get the children busy while we're doing other things, yet in the actual sense, this is also affecting their brain development. We need to be able to define what kind of information or regulate what kind of information we're exposing these children to, and the time and duration they spend on these platforms and technologies. But these are here to help us in terms of accessing information as adults that is actually going to help us with our children, because then you're getting new information, you're accessing research, you're building a community online where you get to share experiences with fellow parents or fellow children, or even school to enable children learn. But yes, there must be some bit of regulation.
Ruth, you've been amazing. You've shared such fascinating insights. We couldn't thank you enough for you sparing time today. We have one last question, but before we go to that, I can see you're very passionate and you've been persistent in the same line of work, even though advocacy can be challenging. For that one patriot who is getting into advocacy or just communications for an NGO, what would be your advice to them?
Wow, that's quite ambiguous. But one sure takeaway is passion. Passion makes the difference, because just like any other work, advocacy can seem challenging. Advocacy is a process, not a one-off. It requires consistency, requires commitment, requires resilience. That without passion, it's quite a long toll, because some of these things really don't come easy. For example, if you're going to do advocacy around policy, this is something that takes a long while. So there's need for consistency and ensuring that you're not giving up on what you want, you're not giving up on your goal, but you're investing time, you're investing resources, you're investing in connections and networks to be able to bring as many people as possible on board. Stakeholder relationships is very key, because then you're building the numbers around your cause. With passion, you're able to build a case and be able to bring as many people on board as to why they need to support your cause. So this is something that I always tell people, that at the end of the day, it is the passion, it is the love for what you do that really sustains you in this journey.
Thank you. We can see the passion on you and how you speak about children's rights and education. Our very last question, the question we ask every guest that comes onto the podcast: are you ready?
Yes, I am.
What do you think it's going to take Uganda to achieve that middle class economy that the World Bank projected by 2040?
Oh, interesting question. There are so many moving parts that will get us there. But as you well know, Uganda is currently grappling with corruption. brand corruption that we're talking about here. But until there's will and there's deliberate initiative to fight corruption, then we will get nowhere. We know that there's quite a lot that is lost in corruption. The money that would be going into service delivery is ending up in people's pockets. Until then, we still have a lot of work to do. And I strongly believe that if we dealt with corruption now, we would see a change. Because then, at the end of the day, citizens will be encouraged, will be motivated to actually pay their taxes, because then they'll know that, okay, their tax is going into development, it's going into service delivery. So as long as I know my money is going, my tax is going to the right things, I'll gladly pay as much tax as is required of me.
I agree with you on the tax bit. I feel like there are some people who can afford to pay taxes, but they're very skeptical about where the money goes. However, I think there is political will to fight corruption, given the several organizations that have been created to fight corruption. But I agree with you on the deliberate intent to fight corruption. So there's been political will, organizations have created, but the deliberate intention, I like that. I like the way you termed it.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been so interesting, dear patriots. I think this has also been valuable for you, like it has been for me, I hope. Thank you so much, Ruth. Your expertise and passion will forever make a difference, and keep doing that, and forever stay curious.
Thank you so much for having me. I equally loved it and looking forward.
Thank you for listening in this far. I really hope that this conversation was helpful to you. Share this episode with your colleagues or friends that you think will benefit from this information. Let them know what you're listening to. Would you also rate our podcast? Because once you rate our podcast, other people like you are able to listen to this information and use it to their own benefit. On a lighter note, follow us on TikTok and Instagram. We really would love to hear your